The dark road stretched before me like a black ribbon tearing through the night, lit only by the flickering headlights of my old car struggling to pierce the thick darkness of this October evening. The threatening clouds rolled above me, promising a storm that would soon break over this isolated stretch of highway where few drivers ventured after midnight. I looked at the dashboard clock showing 2 in the morning, and I still wondered why I had accepted this nocturnal journey to this unknown city, driven by professional urgency that now seemed much less important than my safety. The tired engine of my sedan was making worrying noises, metallic grinding sounds that amplified with each kilometer, reminding me that I hadn't had this vehicle serviced in months. My crackling radio was only picking up static and fragments of distant music, creating an even more oppressive atmosphere in the cabin where the smell of worn leather mixed with that of cold coffee in my thermos. The tortured trees lined the road on both sides, their bare branches scratching the starry sky like skeletal fingers seeking to grasp something invisible in the night. I thought of my wife who must be sleeping peacefully in our cozy bed, unaware that her husband was driving alone on this cursed road where so many unexplained accidents had occurred over the years. The icy wind seeped through the failing door seals, bringing with it strange smells of damp earth and decomposing vegetation that gave me goosebumps. Suddenly, my headlights illuminated a human silhouette at the roadside, thumb raised in the universal gesture of the hitchhiker, motionless like a statue in the white light of my beams. My heart jumped in my chest, and instinctively, I slowed down wondering what a person could be doing in this desolate place at such an hour. The mysterious man wore a long dark coat that floated in the wind, and his face was hidden by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat that concealed his features. Something about his rigid posture and perfect stillness made me uncomfortable, but compassion overcame caution, and I decided to stop to offer him my help. I parked on the shoulder, leaving the engine running, and lowered the passenger window to call out to this nocturnal stranger who still wasn't moving despite my stop. "Good evening, where are you going?" I asked in a voice I wanted to sound confident but which betrayed my growing nervousness at his persistent silence. The man slowly turned his head toward me, and I could finally see part of his face in the glow of the headlights, emaciated features that seemed sculpted from white wax. "I'm going to Willowbrook Cemetery," he replied in a hoarse and cavernous voice that resonated strangely in the night, as if it came from very far away. This destination chilled my blood because I knew that this cemetery had been abandoned for decades after a series of tragic events that had marked local history. Despite my growing unease, I couldn't leave this man alone on this dangerous road, and I motioned for him to get in my car. He approached the door with jerky movements that reminded me of a marionette manipulated by invisible strings, and I noticed that his feet didn't seem to touch the ground. When he settled into the passenger seat, a smell of cold earth invaded the cabin, mixed with something more disturbing that I couldn't identify. "Thank you for your generosity," he murmured while keeping his hat lowered over his eyes, and I noticed that his breathing was imperceptible, as if he didn't need it. I started up again, trying to make conversation to dispel the heavy atmosphere that had settled in the car since his arrival. "Do you live in the area?" I asked him while casting furtive glances at his motionless profile outlined in the darkness. "I used to live in the area," he replied with a strange emphasis on the past, as if he were speaking of an era long gone. This enigmatic response troubled me even more, and I felt my hands become sweaty on the steering wheel as we plunged deeper into the night. The kilometers rolled by slowly, punctuated by the regular noise of the engine and the whistling of the wind that seemed to intensify as we advanced. My passenger remained silent, staring at the road ahead with disturbing intensity, as if he were looking for something that only he could see. "Do you know Willowbrook Cemetery well?" I dared to ask, hoping to get some information about our final destination. "I know it very well," he replied with a smile that I guessed more than saw, and which made me shiver despite the car's heating. At this precise moment, my dear listeners, allow me to remind you that if this story captivates you as much as it terrified me that night, don't hesitate to subscribe to our channel and activate the bell for notifications, because your support gives us the strength to continue telling you these blood-chilling tales that haunt the nights. And don't forget to check the link in the description to participate in our exclusive contests that might allow you to win prizes as mysterious as the stories we narrate to you. The road began to transform, the winding curves followed one another more and more frequently, and I had to slow down to negotiate these dangerous turns in the darkness. My passenger seemed to know this path perfectly, as he anticipated each curve before I could even see where the road led. "Turn left after the century-old oak," he suddenly told me, pointing to a massive tree that I hadn't even noticed in the darkness. I followed his directions, wondering how he could see with such precision in this moonless night where my headlights struggled to illuminate beyond a few meters. The secondary road we took was even narrower and poorly maintained, with potholes that made the car sway dangerously. "Do you come here often?" I asked him, trying to mask my growing nervousness at the increasing isolation of our route. "I come back often," he replied with that same strange intonation that gave double meaning to his simplest words. The thorny bushes now invaded the roadsides, sometimes scratching the car's body with sinister sounds that reminded me of nails on a blackboard. In the distance, I began to distinguish the black silhouettes of tombstones rising against the night sky like broken teeth in a giant jaw. "We're almost there," my passenger murmured, and I felt him lean slightly toward me, emanating that smell of damp earth that was becoming stronger and stronger. The rusty gate of the cemetery appeared in my headlights, half open on its broken hinges, creaking softly under the push of the night wind. I stopped in front of the entrance, leaving the engine running, hoping that my passenger would get out quickly so I could return to civilization. "Thank you for the ride," he said, turning toward me, and for the first time, I could see his eyes in the shadow of his hat. What I saw chilled me to the bone. His eyes were milky white, without pupils, like those of a blind person, but they seemed to stare at me with supernatural intensity. "I will see you again soon," he added with a smile that revealed yellowed and irregular teeth, before getting out of the car with that same jerky gait. I watched him walk away toward the cemetery, and I noticed that he cast no shadow despite the powerful lighting of my headlights that should have drawn his silhouette on the ground. Panicked, I turned around as fast as possible, the tires screeching on the gravel as I sped away from this cursed place at full speed. In my rearview mirror, I saw the mysterious man stop in front of a particular tombstone, but what terrified me most was realizing that he seemed to be slowly sinking into the earth. I drove like a madman to the main road, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself that my imagination was playing tricks on me. Once on the highway, I stopped at the first gas station to collect my thoughts and drink hot coffee that would clear my head. The elderly manager of the station looked at me with curiosity when I told him about my misadventure, and his expression changed dramatically when I mentioned Willowbrook Cemetery. "You picked up a hitchhiker near that cemetery?" he asked me in a trembling voice, his eyes widened with fear. "Yes, why? What's strange about that?" I replied, feeling that I was about to learn something I would prefer to ignore. "Sir, that cemetery was closed 30 years ago after a typhus epidemic decimated the local population," he explained while crossing himself. "So what? What does that have to do with my passenger?" I insisted, even though I was beginning to dread the answer he was going to give me. Since that time, dozens of drivers have reported picking up a hitchhiker near that cemetery, always the same one, according to the descriptions. My blood froze in my veins as he continued his increasingly terrifying account. But the most disturbing thing is that all these drivers died in car accidents in the days following their encounter with this man. I felt my legs give way beneath me, and I had to lean on the counter to keep from falling, so much did this revelation upset me. "You're joking, aren't you? These are just urban legends to scare tourists," I stammered, desperately seeking a rational explanation. I wish that were the case, but I personally knew 3 of these victims, and they had all told me the same story before their death. The old man searched in a drawer and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping that he spread in front of me on the counter. The article dated from 15 years ago and reported the fatal accident of a young family man who had picked up a hitchhiker near Willowbrook Cemetery. His photograph accompanied the article, and I recognized with horror the features of the man I had taken in my car a few hours earlier. "But that's impossible. This man has been dead for 15 years according to your newspaper," I exclaimed, refusing to accept this nightmarish reality. "Exactly, and yet, you met him tonight, like all the other cursed drivers before you," the manager replied with compassion. I looked at the photograph again, and all the details matched perfectly: the long dark coat, the wide-brimmed hat, even that strange expression on his emaciated face. According to legend, Harold Grimsby was a vagrant who squatted in the abandoned cemetery when the typhus epidemic broke out, the old man continued. He was one of the first victims of the disease, but his body was never found because the authorities were afraid of contagion. Since his death, his vengeful spirit has haunted this road, seeking to take other souls with him in death so he wouldn't be alone anymore. I felt sicker and sicker as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, revealing a truth more terrifying than all my worst nightmares. "What can I do to escape this curse?" I asked with the energy of desperation, ready to do anything to save my life. "According to testimonies, you have exactly 7 days before the fatal accident occurs," he announced to me gravely. 7 days to find a way to break this curse, otherwise you will join Harold Grimsby in death, and your spirit will haunt this road in turn. I hastily paid for my coffee and ran to my car, determined to go home and look for a solution before it was too late. The return trip was a nightmare. I jumped at every shadow on the road, convinced that Harold Grimsby would reappear to claim my soul. When I arrived home, I woke my wife to tell her about my adventure, but she refused to believe this story that she called a delusion caused by fatigue. "You have too much imagination, darling. It was just an ordinary man who needed help," she told me while stroking my hair. But I knew that what I had experienced was real, and I spent the following hours searching the internet for all possible information about Harold Grimsby. What I discovered confirmed what the gas station manager had said. Harold Grimsby had indeed died in 1994 during the typhus epidemic. The local archives mentioned that he was known for his aggressive behavior toward travelers whom he accused of having spread the disease in the region. His death had been particularly atrocious, and according to testimonies, he had sworn to take revenge on all those who would take this cursed road. I also found recent testimonies on paranormal forums, other drivers who had lived the same experience as me. Some had survived by finding ways to break the curse, and their advice became my only ray of hope in this desperate situation. The first advice was to return to Willowbrook Cemetery before sunset and find Harold Grimsby's grave. Once in front of his burial place, I should apologize for having disturbed him and explain that I had no bad intentions. Some witnesses claimed that this humble approach had been enough to appease the vengeful spirit and lift the curse that weighed on them. Others suggested leaving an offering on his grave, food, flowers, or a personal object that would show my sincerity. The second day after my encounter with Harold Grimsby, I prepared to return to the cemetery, armed with flowers and a letter of apology. My wife tried to dissuade me, but I couldn't take the risk of doing nothing and passively waiting for my programmed death. The daytime journey to the cemetery revealed a completely different landscape from the one I had crossed in the night, less threatening but equally desolate. In broad daylight, Willowbrook Cemetery looked like a wasteland invaded by weeds and brambles, with broken tombstones scattered here and there. I quickly found Harold Grimsby's grave, recognizable by its blackened tombstone by the years and covered with greenish moss. The inscription was barely legible: Harold Grimsby, 1945-1994, may his soul finally find peace. I placed the flowers on his grave and read my letter of apology aloud, hoping that his spirit could hear me and accept my regrets. "Harold, I'm sorry for having disturbed you. I simply wanted to help you that night. I didn't know you were deceased," I declared with emotion. "I ask for your forgiveness and I hope you will let me continue my life with my family who needs me," I continued, my voice broken by emotion. The wind rose suddenly, making the tall grass around the grave shiver, and I thought I heard a whisper that sounded like, "Not yet." This ambiguous response terrified me more than it reassured me, and I understood that Harold Grimsby wasn't ready to let me go so easily. I went home even more worried than before, wondering what else I could do to escape this supernatural curse. On the third day, I decided to consult a reputed medium in the region, hoping she could help me communicate with Harold Grimsby's spirit. Madame Zelda was an elderly woman with white hair who received her clients in a dark salon filled with candles and mysterious objects. She listened to my story attentively, nodding several times as if she already knew this type of situation. "Harold Grimsby's spirit is very powerful and very angry," she told me after consulting her tarot cards. "He's not just seeking revenge, he wants someone to share his eternal solitude in this cursed cemetery. But there is a way to break this curse, an ancestral ritual that could appease his tormented soul," she added hopefully. She explained that I had to return to the cemetery at exactly midnight on the seventh day, with specific objects to perform this ritual. I needed a black candle, consecrated salt, a photograph of Harold Grimsby, and a personal object that was dear to me. "The ritual is dangerous, because you will have to directly confront Harold Grimsby's spirit and convince him to let you go," she warned me. "If he refuses, you risk remaining prisoner of this cemetery for eternity, but it's your only chance of survival." I paid for her services and left with the list of necessary objects, determined to try everything to save my life. The following days passed in an atmosphere of constant terror. I no longer slept, barely ate, and my wife was beginning to worry seriously. I couldn't reveal the truth about what awaited me, because she wouldn't believe it and would try to prevent me from performing the ritual. On the sixth day, I obtained all the necessary objects: the black candle in an esoteric shop, the consecrated salt from a priest, and Harold Grimsby's photograph that I had found in the archives. As a personal object, I had chosen the wedding ring that my wife had given me on our wedding day, symbolizing everything I had to lose. The last night came faster than I would have liked, and I headed to the cemetery with the apprehension of a condemned man walking to the scaffold. This time, I knew the way by heart, and I arrived at Harold Grimsby's grave a few minutes before midnight. I arranged the objects according to Madame Zelda's instructions: the black candle in the center, the consecrated salt in a circle around the grave, and the photograph placed on the tombstone. At exactly midnight, I lit the black candle and pronounced the ritual words that the medium had taught me. Harold Grimsby, I invoke you and ask you to manifest yourself to hear my plea and judge my fate. The icy wind rose immediately, almost extinguishing my candle, and a thick mist began to rise from the ground around the grave. Harold Grimsby's silhouette appeared slowly in the mist, more terrifying than ever, his white eyes fixed on me with millennial hatred. You dare to disturb me in my eternal rest? He growled in a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. I came to ask you to lift the curse that weighs on me, Harold Grimsby, I replied, trying to control my terror. Why should I spare you when nobody took pity on me when I was dying alone in this cemetery? He retorted with rage. Because I'm not responsible for your death, and my family needs me as you once needed help, I tried to reason with him. The vengeful spirit seemed to reflect for a moment, his spectral form oscillating in the mist like a flame in the wind. You want to negotiate with me? Very well, I propose a deal, he said with a terrifying smile. If you accept to take my place in this cemetery, I will free your soul and you can join your loved ones in the afterlife. This proposition chilled my blood, because it meant I had to die to save my life, an impossible paradox to resolve. There must be another solution. Harold, you were human once, you can understand my despair, I pleaded with emotion. I was human, yes, but humanity abandoned me when I needed it most, he replied with bitterness. Then prove to me that you're different from the others, show me that you deserve to live, he challenged me. I took my wedding ring from my pocket and held it out to him, trembling all over. This ring represents the love I have for my wife and the promise I made to always protect her, I declared solemnly. If you kill me, you will destroy this love and this promise, you will become the monster that disease and solitude created. But if you let me live, I promise to come back to your grave every year to bring you flowers and keep you company. Harold Grimsby observed the ring attentively, and I saw his emaciated features soften slightly, as if a distant memory was coming back to his memory. You remind me of someone I knew once, before the disease transformed me into this vengeful creature, he murmured. I too once had a wife who loved me, before the plague took her away and left me alone in the world, he added with infinite sadness. Then you understand what I feel, Harold, you know what true love represents, I insisted, feeling that I had touched his heart. Harold Grimsby's spirit remained silent for long minutes, weighing my proposal with the gravity of a judge pronouncing a verdict. Very well, I lift the curse that weighs on you, but on one condition, he finally declared. You must keep your promise to come back every year, and if you break your word, I will come back to find you wherever you are. I promise you solemnly to come back every year on the anniversary of this night to honor your memory, I replied with relief. Harold Grimsby nodded and began to fade in the mist, but before disappearing completely, he told me one last thing. Take care of your wife, and never forget how lucky you are to be loved, he murmured in an increasingly faint voice. The mist gradually dissipated, the black candle extinguished itself, and I found myself alone in the silent cemetery. I gathered my things and ran to my car, my heart light for the first time in a week, freed from this mortal curse. The return journey was completely different from the one that had brought me here. I felt reborn to life, appreciating every detail of the night landscape. When I arrived home, I hugged my wife with an intensity she hadn't felt in years, savoring her human warmth. I missed you, I simply told her, and she looked at me with surprise because I had only been gone for a few hours. I missed you too, darling, but why are you so emotional tonight? She asked me tenderly. I just realized how lucky I was to have you in my life, I replied while kissing her passionately. That night, we made love with renewed passion, as if we were reuniting after a long separation. The following months passed peacefully, and I began to wonder if this whole adventure had been just a particularly realistic dream. But when the anniversary of my encounter with Harold Grimsby arrived, I knew I had to keep my promise to preserve my freedom. I returned to Willowbrook Cemetery with a bouquet of fresh flowers and a votive candle that I lit on his grave. Hello Harold, I came back as promised to keep you company, I said while placing the flowers on his moss-covered tombstone. The light wind stirred the flower petals, and I thought I heard a whisper of thanks carried by the autumn breeze. I sat near his grave for an hour, telling him about my life, my joys, my sorrows, as I could have done with an old friend. My wife is pregnant, Harold, We're expecting our first child next spring, I confided to him with emotion. I'm going to be a father, and it's partly thanks to you that I'll be able to know this happiness, I added while touching the cold stone. When I left that evening, I felt that Harold Grimsby was at peace, and that our strange pact had created a form of friendship beyond death. This annual routine became a sacred ritual for me, a moment of recollection and gratitude toward the one who had granted me a second chance. Each year, I brought him news of my growing family, of my children learning to walk then to talk. You would have liked to see my daughter take her first steps, Harold, she has your determination, I told him one day while smiling. The years passed like this, and I aged while carefully keeping the secret of my encounter with the ghostly hitchhiker. My wife never understood why I disappeared every year on the same date, but she respected this mystery that seemed important to me. One day, our eldest son, now an adult, secretly followed me to the cemetery and discovered my strange annual appointment. "Dad, who is Harold Grimsby?" he asked me when I returned to the car, and I saw in his eyes the same curiosity I had once had. I decided to tell him the whole story, this terrifying adventure that had almost cost me my life but had also taught me the value of compassion. "You don't believe me, do you?" I asked him after finishing my account, accustomed to the skepticism this story aroused. "On the contrary, Dad, this explains why you've always been so attentive to our family and so grateful for every moment spent together," he replied wisely. That night, my son decided to accompany me during my annual visit, and we went together to Willowbrook Cemetery. "Harold, I present to you my son, the one I've told you so much about over the years," I declared while lighting the usual candle. My son also placed flowers on the grave, and I saw that he was moved by this simple but meaningful ceremony. "Thank you, Harold, for letting my father live to raise us, my brothers and sisters and me," he said with respect. A moonbeam suddenly pierced the clouds and illuminated the grave, as if Harold Grimsby was giving us his blessing. From that year on, my son always accompanied me during my visits, perpetuating a tradition that might become familial. "One day, when I'm no longer here, you'll have to continue coming here to honor our promise," I told him solemnly. "I promise you, Dad, and I'll teach this story to my own children so they understand the importance of compassion," he replied. The decades flew like turning pages, and I became an old man with white hair, bent by the weight of years. My wife had died a few years earlier, and I had felt that Harold Grimsby shared my pain during my following visit. "She would have loved you, Harold, she had the same generous heart that you must have had when you were alive," I had told him while crying. Now, it was my son who drove me to the cemetery, because my tired eyes no longer allowed me to drive. "We're here, Dad," he told me while helping me out of the car, and I immediately recognized the particular atmosphere of this place. That year, I felt it would be my last visit, my exhausted body reminding me that my time was approaching. "Harold, my old friend, I think we'll see each other again soon," I murmured while caressing his tombstone with my trembling hand. "But don't worry, my son will continue to come see you. The promise will be kept even after my death," I added with a peaceful smile. That night, Harold Grimsby appeared to me one last time, no longer as a vengeful specter, but as the man he had been once. "Thank you for all these years of faithfulness, you have been the only friend I've had since my death," he told me with gratitude. "And you taught me that death wasn't an end but a transformation, Harold," I replied with serenity. "When your time comes, you won't need to haunt this road anymore, you'll finally be able to find your beloved wife again," I promised him. Harold Grimsby nodded and disappeared in a peaceful smile, finally freed from his earthly prison by decades of compassion. I died 3 months later, peacefully in my bed, surrounded by my family who mourned my departure. My son respected his promise and continued to visit Harold Grimsby every year, accompanied by his own children. "Grandfather told us your story, Harold, and we came to tell you that you're not forgotten," my granddaughter said with innocence. This new generation brought childlike joy to the cemetery, and Harold Grimsby must have smiled in his eternal rest. Years passed again, and the story of the ghostly hitchhiker became a family legend transmitted from generation to generation. My great-grandchildren learned to respect Harold Grimsby's memory, understanding that compassion can triumph even over death. "Why do we continue to come here?" one day asked my great-grandson with the natural curiosity of children. "Because your great-great-grandfather understood that every soul deserves to be loved and respected, even after death," his father explained. Harold Grimsby was a lonely and angry man, but love and faithfulness transformed him into a benevolent guardian, he added. Willowbrook Cemetery was no longer haunted by a vengeful spirit, but protected by a peaceful soul who watched over travelers. Never again did any driver report encountering the ghostly hitchhiker on this now peaceful road. Harold Grimsby had found his redemption thanks to a gesture of compassion that had broken the cycle of vengeance and death. This story, my dear listeners, teaches us that even in the deepest darkness, the light of humanity can still shine. Sometimes, it only takes an act of kindness to transform a monster into a guardian angel, and change the course of destiny itself. The road that led to Willowbrook Cemetery was finally renovated and lit, becoming a safe passage for all travelers. A commemorative plaque was installed at the cemetery entrance, reminding passers-by of the importance of compassion toward our fellow beings. In memory of Harold Grimsby and all those who found peace thanks to the generosity of the living, could be read there. My family continued to visit this grave for generations, perpetuating a tradition that honored the memory of two men linked by an extraordinary destiny. And sometimes, during stormy nights, the region's inhabitants claimed to see two benevolent silhouettes protecting travelers on this road. One was that of Harold Grimsby, finally freed from his anger, and the other was mine, watching over those who needed help. Because in death as in life, compassion remains the most powerful of powers, capable of transforming curses into blessings. This true story, which I wanted to share with you, proves that love and faithfulness can triumph even over supernatural forces. So the next time you encounter a hitchhiker on your road, remember that behind every unknown face may hide a soul seeking its redemption. And if you have the courage to extend your hand, you might well discover that humanity is stronger than all the mysteries of the beyond.